Sophia pushed open the door to the jewelry store, a discreet chime announcing her entrance, like a whisper in the hushed silence inside. The delicate scent of leather and vanilla hung in the air, a subtle blend that seemed to permeate every corner of this space where opulence mingled with the purity of exclusivity. The windows sparkled under dim lighting, as if the jewels themselves were patiently waiting to be chosen by hands worthy of their brilliance. Each piece, each frame seemed to tell a story, the story of a life of luxury, of a world reserved for an elite to which Sophia did not belong. She took a deep breath, her eyes lost for a few moments in the shine of diamonds and precious metals. She had been looking for weeks for the perfect gift for Victor, her husband. He was not only the man of her life, the one with whom she had built a home and a life together, but also her greatest support. Victor had always been there to encourage her to be proud of who she was, to overcome the obstacles that society placed in front of her. Their love story, born in the bustling streets of the city, had crossed borders and defied prejudices. Together, they had learned to stand tall in a world that sometimes seemed to want to crush them. But today, in this renowned boutique, she would find herself facing a challenge of a different nature, a challenge that would test her dignity and calm. She walked towards the counter with quiet determination, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. In the center of the room, a saleswoman, a slender figure, observed Sophia distantly. Her blonde hair was neatly pulled back into a strict bun, and she wore a crisp white shirt accompanied by a tight black skirt that outlined her curves without excess. A sparkling badge read, Clara, but her name wasn't what captured Sophia's attention. It was more the attitude she exuded, a palpable coldness, a judgment that seemed to form before a word was even exchanged. Clara's gaze rested briefly on Sophia's face, a glint of indifference crossing her eyes before they slowly moved down her body. The saleswoman arched an eyebrow, and an almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. A smile that didn't reach his eyes, that seemed more of a mask than a real expression. "Can I help you?" Clara asked in a dry, almost mechanical tone. Sophia, although used to this kind of looks and behavior, responded gently, her voice calm but firm, without letting the slightest disturbed emotion show. "Yes, I'm looking for a men's watch, a unique model." She insisted on the word unique, as if to signal that she was there for something special. Clara gave a quick sneer, as if she had just heard a joke that she didn't find funny. "Our models are very exclusive, and very expensive."
"Maybe you should try somewhere else?"
The tone was condescending, icy, as if Sophia's simple presence in the store constituted an intrusion into a space reserved for a higher category clientele. Sophia raised an eyebrow, but her eyes remained firm, determined. She knew that this type of situation was not uncommon. She had experienced others, where her appearance and skin color had been enough to create an invisible, but very real, barrier. However, she was not going to be intimidated. "I'm sure I'm in the right place. I want to see your high-end collection." His voice was calm, but there was a certain strength behind his words, an assurance acquired over years of fighting against unjust judgments. Clara sighed, an exasperation that she didn't even try to hide. With a disdainful movement, she opened a glass box, but instead of showing the prestigious models, she took out a much more modest selection, watches with careful finishing but well outside the luxury standards displayed in the window. "These models are more affordable." The sentence came like a judgment, devaluing Sophia before she even had the chance to choose. A shiver ran through Sophia's body, but she forced herself to remain calm. She knew exactly what was happening. It wasn't the first time she had been judged by her appearance, by the color of her skin, as if all that was enough to define who she was and what she deserved. But today, this wasn't just an ordinary prejudice situation. This was going to go further. "I prefer to see those." Sophia pointed, with a calm but confident gesture, to the pieces displayed in the window, those that shone brightly, those that embodied the luxury that she knew she could afford. Clara sneered softly, a cold, contemptuous sound, before replying with an almost mocking insistence. "Madam, these rooms are reserved for a more distinguished clientele." She paused for a moment before continuing in a deceptively gentle voice. "We have watches within your budget, if you want."
Sophia's blood freezes for a moment.
"Within your budget." This sentence sounded like an insult, as if one's belonging to a certain social group or one's skin color determined not only one's place in society, but also one's desires and rights. She felt the heat rising inside her, but instead of letting it carry her away, she forced herself to breathe deeply. There was no point getting carried away. "And what do you think my budget is?" she asked, her voice betraying not the slightest tremor, but her gaze now as sharp as a diamond. Clara, visibly destabilized, hesitated for a moment before responding in a sharper tone. "Let's say that our regular customers don't ask these kinds of questions." A heavy silence settled in the air. It was almost palpable, like a wave ready to break. Around Sophia, the murmurs of the customers became more and more discreet, some averting their eyes to avoid finding themselves mixed up in the scene, others observing curiously, fascinated by the brilliance of the conflict. Some seemed embarrassed, as if the confrontation was too sharp, too real, to ignore. Others, more cynical, were amused by this scene which unfolded before their eyes, like unexpected entertainment in the cozy atmosphere of the luxury boutique. Clara, arms crossed, observed Sophia with a disdain that she no longer even tried to mask. Her eyes, once distant and calculating, hardened as she rose on her heels, ready to evict this unwanted client from her elite domain. She now considered Sophia an intrusion, an error in the natural order of things. "If you don't intend to buy, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." His voice was icy, every syllable marked with unapologetic contempt. Sophia felt a rush of heat wash over her, an anger that she had long learned to contain. She knew that this kind of situation was commonplace for women like her, and that it could easily disappear into general indifference. But not today. Not this time. She took a deep breath, her fingers sliding slowly over her phone. The cold metal against his skin suddenly felt reassuring, like an anchor in rough seas. She scrolled through the contacts calmly, each movement measured, and pressed a number she knew by heart. She raised the phone to her ear, the sound of the dialing barely perceptible in the tense silence around her.
Honey, can you come?
"It seems I'm not welcome here." Her voice, soft but firm, echoed through the store, and she didn't need to say more. Victor would know exactly what was happening. A few minutes passed, a suspended interval, during which Sophia felt every gaze of the customers on her, but she did not look at them. She didn't want to see them. The shop door finally opened, breaking the tension. A breath of fresh air, and a man entered. He exuded an undeniable presence, a natural elegance, but above all, a quiet confidence that instantly eclipsed the tense atmosphere. Dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his broad shoulders and penetrating gaze seemed to say that this whole place, this decor of luxury and opulence, was only a reflection of his own empire. It was Victor Leroy, her husband. The industrial magnate, one of the most influential men in the economy, owner of the group that owned this chain of jewelry stores, and a familiar face in the pages of economic and financial newspapers. His footsteps echoed with authority, but it was his gaze that had the power to silence an entire room. When he placed a protective hand on Sophia's shoulder, a chill ran through the room. He didn't need to speak to assert his authority. His look was enough.
Is everything okay, my love?
He asked in a soft voice, but tinged with a restrained firmness that betrayed the irritation bubbling within him. Sophia turned her head towards Clara, her gaze calm but sharp, and in a measured, almost icy voice, she replied, "I just wanted to buy a watch for my husband. But apparently, I was deemed unworthy to be a customer here." The words were simple, but carried within them all the pain and injustice of the moment. They pierced the air like an arrow, aimed directly at Clara, who, however, seemed incapable of understanding the gravity of the situation. Victor, without taking his gaze from Clara, took a step forward, a businessman whose patience had few limits when it came to defending his family and his honor. But today, something in his eyes, a colder, more piercing glint, indicated that he was not going to let this slide. "I would like to speak to the director. Immediately." The sentence, spoken calmly, vibrated with an authority that even Clara could not ignore. There was no longer any question of discussing or negotiating. It was a demand, and the saleswoman knew she had no choice but to obey. The store manager came running, his grey suit tarnished with palpable nervousness. His face was drawn and his gaze avoided Victor's as if he already knew that the situation was spiraling out of control.
Mr. Leroy.
What a surprise. A problem? He tried, his hurried voice betraying the worry he no longer hid. Victor, impassive, looked at him with an icy gaze. He had never liked this kind of subterfuge. All he saw was a man about to suffer the consequences of a failure he hadn't even had the honesty to acknowledge. Yes, a big problem. Victor's voice was measured, but each word carried an undeniable force. Your saleswoman here saw fit to humiliate my wife and kick her out of this store. The manager turned pale, and his gaze immediately turned to Clara. The saleswoman's expression, frozen in anguish, left no doubt that she knew that her situation was far from being resolved with an apology. She tried to open her mouth, probably to plead her case, but no words passed her lips. The silence in the store was becoming stifling. Victor didn't give him time to justify himself. He continued in a firm, icy voice that echoed in the air. I do not tolerate discrimination in any business under my name, he declared, his piercing gaze moving towards Clara again, as if he wanted to penetrate her with his gaze. This woman here, Sophia Leroy, is not only my wife, but also an accomplished and respected businesswoman. And even if it wasn't, every customer must be treated with the same respect. The manager swallowed, visibly overwhelmed by the weight of Victor's words. He stammered, trying to avoid the truth that was hitting him in the face.
I'm sorry, Mr. Leroy.
There was a misunderstanding.
No.
This is not a misunderstanding. This is blatant discrimination. Victor's voice rose slightly, imposing his will. And for this, I make an immediate decision. This saleswoman is fired immediately. The manager froze. His legs seemed to be shaking, and he could no longer articulate anything. But it was Clara who dealt the biggest blow. Her eyes widened, panic evident on her face. She wanted to protest, to apologize, but the words escaped her. Guilt took hold of her, and her face, once sure of itself, crumbled under the weight of the truth.
No.
Please, I didn't mean to. Clara tried to plead, but her voice trembled and no longer had the same power as at the beginning. She had lost control. But it was too late. Sophia, still calm, looked at her one last time, her eyes shining with a quiet but unwavering determination. She knew exactly what was at stake here. Much more than a simple sale, much more than a simple employment contract. It was a question of principle. Maybe next time you'll learn not to judge a book by its cover, she said in a firm tone, but without rancor. The message had gotten through. Clara had judged her, rejected her, and now she was suffering the consequences. Without another word, Sophia turned on her heel and took her husband's hand, leading him out of the store. His gait was straight, assured, each step resonating like a silent affirmation of his dignity. She didn't need more. Clara and the manager remained there, frozen in incomprehension, while the customers remained silent, helpless witnesses to an injustice which had just found its rightful balance. Outside, the cool air of the street offered them a welcome respite. Sophia smiled at Victor, her gaze calm, despite the tension of what had just happened. Thanks for coming, she whispered, grateful but moved by her husband's unfailing presence. Victor, his eyes still fixed on the store behind them, gently took her in his arms, placing a light kiss on her forehead. The gesture was simple, but his love for her was all there. There was no need for words, just this silent contact that said it all. Always, he replied simply, his voice soft but full of promise. No matter what hardships they had gone through, he was there, by their side, in every moment, ready to stand against those who attacked them. He would never leave her alone. They walked away, hand in hand, leaving behind a world where true wealth was measured neither in watches nor in diamonds. Their wealth was their dignity, their mutual respect, and the strength to defend themselves against all forms of prejudice. As they left the store, they proved once again that love and respect were the true treasures of life.